Pontiac Township.
John Weigel, Fremont Township.
I'm George Bell from Liberty Hill Township. Please stand for the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Good evening to everyone. We're here again as a continuation of application 3746, which is a request to rezone property from the state district to the general commercial district. And accompanied with it is application 4756, which is a conditional use permit for planned unit development. This is a legal public hearing, therefore, if there's anybody in the room that has not been sworn in at a previous meeting, you need to stand and I will swear you in. Is there anybody that has not been sworn in? Nobody? Thank you. Mr. Braithwaite, I understand you have a part of your presentation to offer for evidence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to submit for the record first a photocopy of the signed letter of intent. Those are not Barrington previously introduced and gave you unsigned copies. We wanted to have the record reflect the signed copy. We also would like to introduce for the record copies of the exhibits used by the witness Lee Brown and his testimony, the land planner, and lastly, copies of the exhibits used by Janet Agnoletti, the executive director of ACOG, who was a witness for the village of North Tarrant.
Thank you. Would you give them staff, please? Thank you. At the end of last meeting, we were interrupted, and staff informed me that we did not make a motion to close the closing statements of the objector organization. So can I have a motion to close the statements of the objector organization? So, there's a second.
Second.
Second by John Ryan. All in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Iden. Good evening. Mr. Dimucci, good evening. You have a closing statement? Thank you.
Good evening. I want to start by thanking the members of the ZBA.
Would you give your name for the court reporter, please?
John Dimucci, Dimucci. I want to start by thanking the members of the ZBA and Chairman Bell for their time and patience while hearing our application. It's been a very long process. We appreciate it. Many months ago, we came to Lake County to solve a land use problem that has affected our property for many years. Specifically, I'm talking about the inappropriate zoning designation attached to our property currently. My brother, sister, and I were very aware of the zoning issue while growing up. And in the last few years, I made a real effort to understand the issues raised by the Taubman proposal and afterwards. We had a representative who followed the Route 12 Border Planning Council efforts, which took a few years to complete. Through that, we learned what the desires and intentions of Killdeer, Deer Park, Lake Zurich, Hawthorne Woods, North Barrington, Lake County, and Nipsey were with regards to quality and community character for commercial development along the corridor. In fact, it was our introduction, this was actually our introduction to the pattern book as a tool to supplement zoning ordinances. We learned that zoning codes are very specific regarding quantitative standards, things like how high, how many to the acre, how many parking spaces, things like that. But the qualitative standards are very difficult to express with hard numbers. So the Corridor Council turned to a pattern book. Based on what we had learned, we decided to propose that we would use roughly half our land for commercial development and half as permanent open space. We went to the Lake County staff and learned that they wanted even more extensive quality controls than we had anticipated. But we were already committed amongst ourselves to emphasize quality based on what we had learned, so we agreed. To point out that our selection of commercial use fits with the local comprehensive plans. I would also point out that every actual expert testifying before you in these hearings recognized the commercial nature of our property. Also, the local village officials have told you that our property should contain a significant commercial element. We presented our proposal during the first part of the first ZBA hearing on July 18th. In all, we have gathered together with the ZBA a total of 8 times, including tonight, during which time opponents have fully expressed their views. I will not attempt to repeat our presentation, except to say in general that we really believe we have presented a very innovative plan for the future of our property. But after we presented this innovative and creative approach, all we have heard is opposition to a retail mall of the sort that the Taubman Company proposed almost 15 years ago. I would point out that we have not proposed anything like the Taubman project. The Acre organization has even submitted to you transcripts of the Taubman hearings from all those years ago. So please allow us to respond to a few points that have been presented to you by opponents of our proposal. This will take less than 15 minutes, and I just have a few slides. First is a broad category of claims that are simply hyperbole or great exaggeration. The best example of this has to do with water consumption. The fact is that we have an allocation of sewer service from Lake Zurich of 705 PE, or population equivalent. That number comes from the allocation given to our property in an intergovernmental agreement between Lake Zurich and Hawthorne Woods. 1 PE equals 100 gallons per day. So this 705 PE translates to 70,500 gallons. This is a far cry from the 6 million gallons that the Acre Group claimed we would consume. Of course, there would be, a certain amount of water that would be actually consumed, so that would need to be discharged in the sewer, but I think you get my point. Of more importance to us at this moment are the claims that aren't so obviously exaggerated, but still have a real potential for misleading. Last week, Mr. Hunt told you during Acre's presentation that the Hawthorne Woods 2004 Comprehensive Plan accurately reflected the 2002 Intergovernmental Agreement with North Barrington. He put up a slide with the map of the 2004 Comprehensive Plan and told you that the commercial area, or the red spot, was faithful to the IGA. He then went on to tell you the designation of 50 acres of commercial in the comprehensive plan, in the comprehensive plan text, was simply a typo. I want to show you a slide that he didn't show you. This is actual language from the 2004 comprehensive plan, and this is the most current plan. It clearly says, this site, which is over 100 acres in size, lies in unincorporated Lake County. Provided that an acceptable alternative to conventional septic system waste disposal can be achieved, then the village envisions that up to 50 acres of this site could be developed for commercial use. This language is very clear. It considers a possible change in sewer availability. There is no doubt in my mind that we accurately describe this as being very different from the 2002 IGA, just as the map on the comprehensive plan is different than the map on the IGA. And just as a quick side note, If anybody would like to look at those those agreements, the 1999 or 2002 IGA agreements, they're available to view anytime on our website. I also wanted to clear up some testimony regarding the BACOG comprehensive plan. Last week, BACOG found fault with our description of their comprehensive plan. They showed you the very same map from the BACOG plan that we showed you. Then they gave you their interpretation of the meaning of the red color covering 100% of our property. I just want to be sure that you understand that our description of the BACOG plan was exactly as is shown on their website. An argument has also been made that the trend of development along Route 12 does not apply to the immediate areas around our property. I would remind everyone that there has been no new single-family development proposed anywhere along Route 12 from Lake Cook Road all the way to Fox Lake in the last 20 years. Every change that has occurred in land use has been to commercial uses, with the exception of a small amount of high-density multifamily. Please remember, our property has two large undeveloped parcels nearby: Mount St. Joseph's to the south and the Lakewood Forest Preserve to the north. If you focus closely enough to those properties, an argument can be made that our property would have very little development potential at all. We think this is tortured reasoning, or certainly false logic. We are indeed part of the larger Route 12 commercial corridor. Another concern raised has to do with building height and whether we should buffer with single-family development along Old McHenry Road. But you really need to think this through. Here's a slide showing permitted heights under the Lake County Unified Development Ordinance. The homes in a residential subdivision along Old McHenry Road would be allowed to be 50 feet in height to the ridge of the house, within 50 feet of the lot line under our current state zoning. Under the proposed LOI, a commercial building would have to be 300 feet away to be that same height. Also, here's a slide of a rendering commissioned by Hawthorne Woods and provided to you by Acre during Mr. Hunt's presentation. And here's a section of that same slide so you can see it in a bit more detail. It really looks like that tower to the side is well over 7 stories in height. It was presented to Lake County's Planning, Building, and Zoning Committee years ago as well. Just take a look at this and ask yourself how serious Mr. Hunt's objections to building height really are. The topic of surface water seemed to get a lot of discussion during these proceedings. And I'm not going to portray myself as an expert on surface water by any means. I will, however, point out that we have agreed to the most restrictive surface water runoff standards the county has, the Squaw Creek watershed restrictions. This is really the gold standard when it comes to surface water restrictions. It's not the standard in the ordinance because it's far too expensive and it requires too large of a percentage of any site to apply generally in the county. Nobody building in Lake County has ever volunteered to impose the standard on themselves, but we are willing to do so. As we all know, the property is currently a farm field, so there are virtually no restrictions regarding the water runoff and erosion in its current agricultural state. There are no restrictions on suspended solids or anything else regarding water quality downstream, currently. I would now like to quickly talk about the topic of home values. Several weeks ago, our real estate valuation consultant, Dick Rodowig, who is a nationally recognized expert in this field, gave his testimony based on a careful study he did of individual house sales in Deer Park. He compiled data before, during, and after the development of the Deer Park Killdeer commercial area. While I realize his findings may have not been very popular with some members of the audience, his data has not been disputed. Last week, the Acre Group had an expert, Mr. Schmidt, testify on their behalf. He admitted he had almost no review of Mr. Rodowig's evidence. He then gave testimony about the Hunt Club development near Gurney Mills Mall. I would just like to point out again that we have never proposed anything even close to something like the Gurney Mills Mall. But what struck me most during Mr. Schmidt's testimony was not what he said, but rather it's what he didn't say. As a local residential real estate appraiser concentrating in the Barrington area, Mr. Schmidt would have certainly worked on several appraisals of homes in the Deer Park area over the past several years. He would have certainly seen any trends over that time period, but not once did he testify that the development of the commercial property in Deer Park and Killdeer had any adverse effect on the home values in that area. I can only conclude that his silence on this issue only solidifies Mr. Roderick's report. And finally, there is the claim that our application is vague. Originally, we thought we might ask for a straight rezoning change to use about half our property. But at the request of the county staff, we agreed to a two-step zoning process, also known as form-based zoning. At first, we weren't quite sure about this process. But after being educated on this innovative zoning technique by, again, Mr. Roderick, our consultant, we came to support the county staff's idea. Incidentally, Mr. Roderick is an expert on this topic and has helped draft several form-based zoning codes all over the country. Once again, if anyone's interested, there's more information about this type of zoning available to view on our website. But if anyone thinks that our request is too permissive, I submit to you the documents that will control this development. First, the Unified Development Ordinance. Next, our application, which includes the 63-page pattern book, 17 pages of recommendations from the county staff, and finally, the extensive recommendations presented by the village over the course of these proceedings. When these proceedings began, there was much discussion about the lack of coordination with the two villages. Well, this has now been addressed. It has always been our hope this process would help clean up the conflicts and contradictions between the comprehensive plans and IGAs that were never fully implemented. It appears now we all have an opportunity to solve these issues surrounding our property. This has been initiated through a letter of intent that has been drafted by Hawthorne Woods, North Barrington, and the county. The result of this proposed new agreement would allow for the appropriate use of our property with strict guidelines controlled by Lake County. We have reviewed the letter of intent and realize there is still more work to be done between the parties involved, but within the four corners of the document, we find the letter of intent to be acceptable. This concludes our closing remarks. I want to thank you all again for your time and patience. I know it's been a long process. Please help us with a positive recommendation to the county board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dimucci. We thank you also for your patience with the board and the public out here for attending all these meetings, and particularly with all the information that you provided the board. We really appreciate it. Thank you. I can I have a motion to close the petitioner's closing statement.
So moved.
Motion by John Reingold, second. Second by Mark Raymond, all in favor?
Aye.
Right. All right, we're going to move to the staff's presentation of the discussion of conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Zoning Board of Appeals, Eric Wagner, Lake County Planning Building Development Department. This introduction is intended to assist the Zoning Board of Appeals in navigating through the 62 pages of design conditions, 16 pages of additional staff conditions, 3 pages of letter of intent development conditions, over 80 pages of conditions in all, with several conditions per page, and any other proposed conditions that have been submitted in public testimony. That's an enormous number of proposed conditions for the ZBA to try to assimilate as it discusses conditions. And it's, to staff's knowledge, more than has ever been contemplated as part of any county development application. When considering conditions of approval, you will also bear in mind the public testimony provided over the course of, at this point, 31 hours of official RPC meetings and ZBA hearings thus far. You're also in receipt of many public comments from the 9 additional hours of staff open houses back in March, and numerous emails and other correspondence provided to staff throughout this process going back as far as February this year. With that, I'll be introducing various staff, county county staff who will provide summaries of conditions related to their respective areas of expertise and who will be on hand to respond within their subject matter to any ZBA questions that may arise in the ZBA discussion. But before we begin with the summary by topic area, I'd like to put to rest three main issues of contention. These are the three main concerns that have been expressed by members of the public throughout the project's review process. Contention number one is that the project lacks sufficient detail. This project is at the concept plan stage and it is intended to provide a review of the project concept. This is per the Lake County Unified Development Ordinance. This is the county's ordinance, the county's regulations. It's not intended to be a final site plan with every locational detail locked in. That comes, again, per the county's ordinance at the final development plan stage. Nonetheless, at this concept plan stage, there is an enormous amount of detail considering the facts. At this point, the project is defined by a 53-acre development area, inclusive of buildings, parking, and pedestrian amenities, within required setbacks. It's further bounded by height limits, with a letter of intent proposing further staggering of such height as a relation to setbacks. It's tightened up by state-of-the-art dark sky lighting thresholds. It's limited to a specified amount of retail per the proposed letter of intent conditions and a total limit of floor area. It requires half of the site to be permanently preserved in naturally vegetated open space. And this concept plan is constrained by the large number of proposed development conditions mentioned before, including the pattern books of community character related conditions on architecture, site layout, landscaping, and signage, letter of intent restrictions on prohibited uses, pedestrian orientation, requirements and guarantees for public sewer and water, and the proposed staff conditions addressing issues such as stormwater management, water quality protection, construction and maintenance guarantees, and transportation and access. That's again over 80 pages of conditions. Contention number two is that the county cannot control the development. This issue is not valid for several reasons. First, the enormous number of conditions mentioned before, in addition to all of the normal regulatory requirements of the county, prescribe a great deal of control over the site's development and long-term use. Second, the county is a very large professional organization that functions as an integrated project management team in reviewing and monitoring development projects throughout their life cycle. We have Public Works, Division of Transportation, Stormwater Management, and the Planning, Building, and Development Department working in tandem on these projects. Thanks to our recent intergovernmental planning efforts, the local villages of North Barrington and Hawthorne Woods will be able to review and comment on the final development plan as well. We should continue to remind ourselves that this is the first stage of the development review process, the preliminary stage. At this stage, if the rezoning is approved, subject to the CUP and PUD conditions, the rezoning will still not take effect until the final development plan is submitted, reviewed for compliance with each and every one of the approved development conditions, and approved by the county after public input. What is that public input? The public would be invited to participate in public informational meetings prior to the county's final decision. Until that time, the property remains zoned estate. No development can occur on the property, not a single brick can be placed until that final development plan approval. And it's important to reiterate that the development project at that final stage cannot be approved unless and until a developer submits a final development plan demonstrating that each and every condition that's been imposed on the project has been met. That's why your review of these conditions at this preliminary stage is so important. The intergovernmental agreement and all of these conditions of approval lock in the development for good, effectuated through a court order as proposed in the letter of intent. This is as ironclad as it gets. And finally, let's consider the petitioner's development approach here, which combines zoning with both quantitative provisions, size and scale, height, setbacks, etc., along with qualitative measures. This is the pattern book, the letter of intent concepts, etc. That approach exerts an enormous amount of control because it turns the typical development review process on its head. Typically, the developer proposes a final product and proposes how to shoehorn that product into a site. The county or the village, in is in a reactive mode at that point and doesn't have a real opportunity to plan for the best use of the site under pressure. Here instead, the property owner, the county, and now the two adjacent villages are saying, here's the product that we think is appropriate. We set the quantitative parameters, we set the qualitative or community character issues that must be met by any future developer coming through the door. So instead of reacting to a finished product under pressure, we've planned here for a future product that better fits the property and the community. And if a potential developer cannot live within those constraints, then we'll wait for another one who can and will. That is the essence of proactive site planning, is the kind of process the county would like to see more of for development in general. The final contention is that this project is not being handled through a cooperative intergovernmental process that respects the local villages. So thanks to the effort of the local county board members and the village leaders, that issue has been resolved. With that, now we'll proceed to a summary of the conditions by topical area. I'll first introduce Pat Tierney, Principal Planner with Lake County Department of Planning and Building Development.
Good evening. Derek said I'm Pat Tierney, Principal Planner with our Department of Planning and Building Development, where I've worked for the last 24 years. I'm also designated project manager for this application. I'll be able to summarize the conditions that relate to the size and scale of development, open space, and community character.
We can't hear.
You have exhibit E, or appendix B, I should say, and then the letter of intent. Items that I'm going to be addressing are in these documents. I'm here to confirm everything that Eric has mentioned with respect to the size and scale of the development, because they are included in both the letter of intent and in the appendix B. First, the development size and scale. The proposed application consists of a limit of floor area at 800,000 square feet. The letter of intent proposal calls for a condition that reduces that number to 650,000 square feet, with a further limit of 450,000 square feet for retail, and the balance of the project in local community service-oriented uses or general office. This is less than half of what straight general commercial zoning would allow for the property, which is 1.4 million square feet. The application limits the development area of the site to no more than 53 acres. That is included in one of our conditions. The application calls for a maximum height of 50 feet for buildings with an additional 15 feet of height allowed for architectural features such as cupolas and towers. Bear in mind that the estate zone currently allows at a 50-foot setback a residential structure to be 50 feet in height. The letter of intent proposes that within 300 feet of the Old McHenry Road right-of-way, buildings shall be no taller than 35 feet and height with 15 feet additional for architectural buildings that would be closer to Old McHenry Road. Setbacks overall for the property are 100 feet from US Route 12, 150 feet from Old McHenry Road and the end of the south property line against Valentine Manor subdivision, and 1,000 feet from the eastern property line. All of these standards exceed the general commercial district standard in the UDO. For open space, as indicated, the site is 53 acres of development area. The balance of the property, which is basically 50 acres, will remain in permanent open space. This open space area would be legally encumbered and integrated into the final development plan and shall be limited to such uses and improvements as natural resources, stormwater detention facilities, open water features, recreational improvements, utilities, and landscape improvements. The open space area will be restored and established in part with native vegetation indigenous to Lake County. Finally, community character and compatibility. The pattern book consists of architecture, signage, site layout, landscaping, and buffering issues. The pattern book is modeled after the Route 12 Border Planning Council's extensive work in build-up, and in this sense, epitomizes the local community character. Remember, this group consisted of all local communities in this township, from Kildare and Deer Park to Lake Zurich, North Barrington, Hawthorne Woods, along with the county participation in that of Northeastern Regional Planning Commission, now CMAC. In recognition of the council's extensive several-year planning process to identify and memorialize local community character issues, the county's framework plan requires the use of such guidelines for county PUDs along US Route 12 in Eula Township. That includes this property and this application. Now to address the objectors' concerns with respect to discretionary language and some of the pattern conditions, staff has recommended a condition requiring the county's discretionary review whether each division has been met at the final development plan stage, both at the department level, by the director, and subsequently by the county board committee after public meeting input. The letter of intent provides further design enhancement to this with an emphasis on pedestrian scale circulation and amenities and the screening of buildings. A comment that came up frequently was lighting. Proposal calls for very strict lighting standards above and beyond what the county's regulations require. The application and letter of intent further propose dark sky technologies on all lights on the site. One public comment was that the lighting standards only apply to each bulb, but didn't address the overall effect of the lighting, site lighting beyond the Dimucci property. Please understand that the lighting standard addresses the maximum limit of all lighting at the site's property lines and not beneath each bulb. Any lighting that is submitted at the final development plan stage must include a photometric engineering study providing or proving that the lighting throughout the site stays within the strict limits everywhere along the site's property lines. Finally, a very persistent concern raised in public testimony was the issue of incompatible uses. Despite staff's repeated statements that only uses allowed by right in the general commercial zone would be allowed in this project, there has been persistent public comment that many industrial or quasi-industrial uses would be allowed. That's simply not true. For the county's PUD regulations, so landscape contractors are not allowed. Heliports and airports are not allowed. Truck and trailer parking, not allowed. Bus terminals are not allowed. Gasoline stations and fuel stores are not allowed. Adult entertainment are not allowed, both by our ordinance and by state law. The list goes on. The letter of intent further prohibits additional uses that are incompatible, such as tattoo parlors, mortuaries, self-service laundromats, and hospitals. This is entirely consistent with the approach taken by the villages in their 1999 and 2002 IGA to prohibit incompatible uses by allowing uses that are keeping with the character of the surrounding area. Now I will introduce Betsy Duker, the Lake County Division of Transportation, and she will address the conditions relating to transportation and access.
Okay. Is that better?
Yes.
My last name is spelled D-U-C-K-E-R-T. I am a principal engineer for the Lake County Division of Transportation. I have been at the LCDOT for almost 22 years. I am a licensed professional engineer registered in the state of Illinois. Our role will be to review the access-related improvements within the right-of-way of the county highway, Old McHenry Road, that will be warranted by a final development plan. Our review will also be done in conjunction with the Illinois Department of Transportation, which has jurisdiction over US Route 12 and its intersection with Old McHenry Road. All access-related improvements are the final financial responsibility of the developer. Let me repeat, all access-related improvements are the financial responsibility of the developer. And the extent of improvements will be determined and enforced by IDOT and LCDOT. Nothing can be built on the site without those improvements and approvals. Any work done within a county highway right-of-way is governed by two ordinances administered by the county engineer. the Lake County Highway Access Regulation Ordinance, and the Lake County Temporary Highway Closure and Utility and Facility Placement Ordinance. Now to a summary of DOT's requirements and conditions. Excuse my voice, I'm just getting over a cold. The Lake County Division of Transportation will work closely with the Illinois Department of Transportation to review the traffic impacts of any development on this site and will have the surrounding road network. The county will issue permits for any work within the right-of-way of Old McHenry Road, and IDOT will issue permits for any work within the right-of-way of US Route 12. A site distance study must be provided by a developer's engineer to determine the location of an access point along the frontage of the property that provides sufficient site distance for traffic leaving and entering the site. A traffic study prepared in accordance with the Lake County Highway Access Regulation Ordinance shall be provided by a future developer to accurately assess the impact to Old McHenry Road for any development. The area of influence to be studied is determined by the traffic to be generated by the subject site. The latest edition of the ITE Trip Generation Manual shall be used by a future developer's traffic engineer to determine the trip generation rates for the specific uses. The traffic study shall include an evaluation of the existing road network in the vicinity of the development, the warrant for a traffic signal at any proposed access point on Old McHenry Road, and road widening improvements based upon the existing traffic and the addition of site-generated traffic. This study will also review any improvements needed at the intersection of Old McHenry Road and US Route 12. Looking at the letter of intent proposal using the 450,000 square feet of retail commercial and 200,000 square feet of local service-oriented businesses and offices, along with our experience, tells us the following. Improvements, including additional through lanes on Old McHenry Road, will most likely extend from the intersection with Route 12 to the intersection with Abbey Glen Road. At the intersection of Old McHenry Road and US Route 12, there will be additional turn lanes and an upgrade to the signal equipment necessary. At the proposed access point to the development on Old McHenry Road, there will be turn lanes to get into the site, and most likely a traffic signal would be warranted. To summarize, we know that extensive improvements to the intersection and the roads will be necessary here. And as I've just mentioned, we won't determine precisely what those improvements will be and the developer costs until the final development plan uses are locked in. The specific uses determine the traffic load and therefore the extent and cost of the improvements. But the final development plan cannot be approved until the uses are determined and the resulting improvements and developer costs finalized. The LCDOT is committed to working with the neighboring road jurisdictions to minimize any cut-through traffic. Sufficient right-of-way must be dedicated along the frontage of the site to accommodate all improvements. The current minimum half right-of-way requirement on this portion of Old McHenry Road is 60 feet. Additional right-of-way may be necessary to accommodate any pedestrian facilities, utility or facility relocations, or additional pavement widening. The addition of the impervious area, i.e. the widened pavement, must be accounted for in the detention calculations for the on-site detention ponds. The entire cost of these improvements, including the engineering, the construction, the right-of-way acquisition, permits, insurance, and performance guarantees, etc., are borne solely by the developer. I would now like to introduce Gordon White, Chief Engineer for Lake County Public Works, will summarize the conditions of public sewer and water to the property.
Good evening. I'm Gordon White, Chief Engineer for Lake County Public Works. I have been for the last 4 years, and I've been a practicing engineer in this county for 37 years. I'm here to summarize the project's conditions related to public sewer and water for the future development of this property. Village of Lake Zurich entered into an agreement with the property owner in 2011 to provide sewer and water services to the Dimucci property for 705 population equivalent, and 1 population equivalent equals 100 gallons per day. A gravity sanitary sewer, and force main have been constructed along Route 12 and are available to service the property by a 2009 agreement between the Village of North Barrington, the Village of Lake Zurich, and the County of Lake. Hawthorne Woods, by an agreement in 2009 with Lake County, agreed not to object to sanitary sewer service to the subject property as long as it remained within unincorporated Lake County. Lake County Public Works has adequate reserve capacity to serve this property at the Des Plaines River Water Reclamation Facility. Pursuant to the letter of intent, Hawthorne Woods will immediately work to amend any existing agreements with Lake Zurich or others to secure public water service and public sewer service to the property available upon the final development plan approval. Therefore, public water will be available to serve this property immediately upon final plan approval, and no interim well is needed. As to the capacity of Lake Zurich's public water supply, there were some very inaccurate statements made on a previous Thursday regarding potential usage on the site. One figure called for up to 6 million gallons per day. That is not the case under any conceivable use of this property. According to Lake Zurich Public Works, Lake Zurich for its entire village, and I mean for every single water user in the entire village, uses between 1.7 and 2.1 million gallons per day, and can supply up to 6.9 million gallons per day if necessary. However, the most water ever used by a Lake County community-wide, was Vernon Hills use on June 24, 2005 of 5.8 million gallons. To be quite blunt, the public water allocation for the agreement with Lake Zurich contemplates 70,500 gallons per day, a far cry below the 6 million gallons per day stated last week. And let's not forget that the current zoning of the property, if it were to develop residentially, would allow residential uses to permanently draw from the local shallow aquifer, a concern that was voiced repeatedly by the neighboring public. The final development plan will instead avoid the use of the local shallow aquifer and bring water in from a much more remote and larger public supply through Lake Zurich. I would like now to introduce Matthew Myers, Assistant Chief Engineer of the Lake County Planning, Building and Development Department, who will summarize the environmental controls for the site development and construction process for the project.
Good evening. My name is Matthew Myers, M-E-Y-E-R-S. I'm the Assistant Chief Engineer for Lake County Planning, Building, and Development. I'm a licensed professional engineer registered in the state of Illinois a certified floodplain manager, and a certified professional in erosion and sediment control. I'm representing the Building and Engineering Division. Our role will be to review the final development plan from an engineering standpoint, ensuring the development complies with the Lake County Unified Development Ordinance and the improved conditions. We will also ensure that the environment is protected during the construction process. The Building and Engineering Division discussed this project in detail. We came up with multiple conditions for the development, taking into account concerns raised, as well as our experience with the review, permitting, and construction of a development such as this. The following is an overview of some of the construction-related conditions that we have recommended. With regard to on-site soils, a soils report will be required to be prepared for submittal once final building locations have been established. The soils report will need to be prepared by an Illinois licensed professional engineer and will need to include a boring log and development recommendations for the on-site structural design. The final development plan will need to meet the Unified Development Ordinance as it pertains to soil erosion and sediment control, including the submittal of a detailed stormwater pollution prevention plan, also known as a SWIP, meeting IEPA standards. This will include a soil erosion and sediment control plan, along with detailed phasing and sequencing plans. The county requires a SMC, Stormwater Management Commission listed designated erosion control inspector throughout the construction of the development to complete inspections weekly or after each 1/2 inch equivalent rainfall. Some additional conditions have been proposed, such as the watering of the construction areas during dry or arid conditions to avoid wind erosion. Communication will be key on site during the construction of any development this size. Our department's inspection staff will be on site weekly or more frequently as necessary, conducting site and building inspections. Regular weekly and other as-needed meetings will be required on site with the county, applicant, contractor, engineer, and the required designated erosion control inspector to discuss the construction status. All inspection activities, building and site development related, will be handled through the Lake County Planning Building Development Department using in-house staff for control and consistency. We will meet and communicate issues on site with the Lake County Stormwater Management Commission as necessary. During the construction, we will also be inspecting on a regular basis to make sure that all agreed upon conditions and construction practices are being followed, including the condition to limit site disturbance within the open space areas or utilizing low ground pressure machinery and equipment except where structural compaction is required. Extensive performance and maintenance guarantees will be required prior to, during, and after the construction of the development. The value of the guarantees will be based on the construction, installation, and long-term maintenance of the cost of soil erosion sediment control, landscaping, and the establishment of the stormwater management facilities on the development site. The performance guarantee amount will be based on the detailed cost estimates to be submitted by the appropriate design professionals. The performance guarantee will not be released in total until the entire site is improved and stabilized. I will now introduce Kurt Wolford, Chief Engineer for the Lake County Stormwater Management Commission, who will talk about long-term stormwater and water quality controls for the property. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Kurt Wolford. For the record, it's W-O-O-L-F-O-R-D. I'm a professional engineer and a certified floodplain manager. My position as Chief Engineer of the Lake County Stormwater Management Commission is to act as the enforcement officer for the county-wide watershed development ordinance. My responsibilities include regulatory permitting and enforcement for 14 communities in Lake County and the administration of the certification process for the remaining 41 communities in Lake County, which includes Hawthorne Woods, North Barrington, and the unincorporated Lake County area. As part of the letter of intent conditions, the Stormwater Management Commission will exercise concurrent responsibility with the Lake County Planning Building Development Department for review and approval over all stormwater-related components of the projects, utilizing the standards of the Unified Development Ordinance. If you can look at the exhibit here on the screen, we all live in a watershed generally defined by land surface topography. There are 26 separate watersheds in Lake County. The Dimucci property is predominantly located in the headwaters of the Flint Creek watershed. The smaller northern tip of the property is located in the Tower Lake Drain watershed. The existing natural drainage from the Dimucci site flows through Timber Creek and Timber Lake to the northwest in the Tower Lake Drain watershed, and through the Windstone development and the North Barrington to the southwest into the Flint Creek watershed. These existing natural drainage ways are mapped as FEMA regulatory floodplains. During large storm events, undetained and untreated runoff is currently discharged from the Dimucci property and is commingled with downstream runoff, creating a cumulative effect of higher flow rates and depths of runoff. Untreated runoff from agricultural land includes pesticides, fertilizers, suspended sediment from land erosion, and crop residue. I'll talk about release rates in a minute. Stormwater detention systems collect all the runoff from a development area, detain it, and slowly release it over an extended period of time. Detention systems delay the peak flow rates from the property to a further point in time, allowing downstream areas to drain out before the peak headwater runoff occurs. The ordinance requires strategies that address water quality impairments. This includes minimization of impervious surfaces and the use of appropriate green infrastructure, best management practices, also referred to as BMPs, and buffer areas. Hydrocarbons, oils, and grease removal technologies and BMPs are also required for any development with more than 25 parking stalls. Detention facilities further provide for the settling of sediment rather than the unregulated release of those sediments downstream in the property's current agricultural use. In addition to ordinance requirements, the conditions of the PUD list specific strategies including limiting site disturbance within the open space areas or utilizing low ground pressure machinery and equipment, minimization of impervious surface, and the use of green infrastructure techniques such as rain gardens, bioswales, naturalized detention facilities, and native vegetation. The conditions of the PUD also recommend the adoption of a de-icing program to effectuate progressive changes in snow and ice control practices that will reduce salt, sand use, and environmental impacts while meeting safety and mobility needs of road and parking lot users. Illinois drainage law gives higher lands the right of drainage and discharge onto lower lands. Higher lands also have the right to improve the natural drainage system. The design of the stormwater systems must not result in the transfer of drainage between watersheds, as you can see on the exhibit. Only a small portion of the site drains into Timber Creek, and that drainage area will not be enlarged. The majority of the property will drain to the southwest through the Windstone subdivision. The Windstone engineering plans were designed and properly accounted for off-site flows from the Dimucci property. Adequate downstream capacity will need to be studied during the engineering design and properly accounted for in the site's detention network. Every site has the potential for stormwater runoff. Runoff is typically increased when impervious surfaces block rainfall from being absorbed or infiltrated into the ground. Stormwater detention systems are required to collect, detain, and control the rate of discharge, also known as a release rate, from the site. Allowable release rates are the ordinance's regulatory controls governing the maximum flow rates that can be discharged off-site from a property. The industry term used for this flow rate measurement is cubic feet per second, or CFS. There is an inverse relationship between release rates and the size of stormwater detention systems. As a release rate gets smaller, the required detention system gets larger. 25 of the 26 watersheds in Lake County have an allowable release rate of 0.04 CFS per acre for the 2-year storm event and 0.15 CFS per acre for the 100-year storm event. The Squaw Creek watershed has the most restrictive watershed-specific release rate of 0.02 CFS per acre for the 2-year storm event and 0.9 CFS per acre for the 100-year storm event. Although the Dimucci property is entirely located outside of the Squaw Creek watershed, the conditions require that the development will be held not only to the most restrictive release rate in Lake County, but the most restrictive across the entire Northeast Illinois region. I'll now hand it back to Eric Wagner, Director of the Lake County Planning and Building Development Department, for a few miscellaneous condition topics and conclusions.
Thank you, Kurt. A couple of last issues came up in the testimony related to crime control and fire protection. I'll very briefly address those two issues. There were several comments that commercial development of this property would increase crime and that local law enforcement will be inadequately prepared to deal with that. Currently, the Lake County Sheriff's Office has a big patrol presence in the area, given the significant unincorporated population in this area, but the letter of intent proposes further a requirement that the project offer a land set aside for a Sheriff's Office substation, as well as an on-site security condition if requested by the sheriff. Any financial impacts to the villages related to patrolling would be covered by the revenue sharing arrangement. As to fire protection, this is an issue that will be well handled by way of both the county's standard commercial building codes in terms of fire suppression and fire-resistant construction methods. Local fire district review of final plans is part of our commercial plan review process for all commercial development. The letter of intent goes further by providing for a land set aside for a substation if requested. So now that staff has summarized the conditions for the Zoning Board of Appeals, the ZBA can continue, or begin rather, its discussion of the proposed conditions with staff on hand to answer any questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. In a moment, the ZBA will begin its discussion of conditions for the application. Before we begin, I'd like to explain to everyone here tonight how this step of the process works. ZBA members will discuss potential conditions of approval amongst themselves, and along the way, we may call upon staff and the petitioners or others here tonight to respond to specific questions that we may have during our discussion. If you're asked to respond to our specific questions, please approach the podium and speak clearly and briefly into the microphone. Please be brief and to the point when responding. At this point in time, because we are into the ZBA discussion stage, you will not be recognized unless you have been specifically asked to respond to a question. And also, just for the board members, I know Carol, you had a question. You can bring it up during the discussion. You can ask the staff question. Is there any need for a break right here on the board? Everybody's okay? Good. Okay, we can begin. Rick?
I don't have any questions particularly right now as I went through them, but I appreciate and I think it's helpful for the public to hear the conditions that were put on there, and I think the staff did a good job of going through those. I think throughout the process, those were the concerns that it seems like a lot of the residents have had, and it seems like you've addressed many of those as we've gone through. So I'm going to let my fellow board members see if they have any questions at this time and come back and come in.
Thank you. Carol?
My question was,
to you, Eric, could you just again please repeat when an actual zoning change would take place? I'd just like that repeated.
The zoning change from estate to general commercial would not take effect until such time as the county has received the final development plan, reviewed that final development plan, and approved that final development plan. We are not at that stage. We're at the preliminary stage. Even when the county board acts on the rezoning request, if the county board approves the rezoning request, it doesn't take effect yet. It only takes effect at such time as the county approves a final development plan. It's still a state until that point in time.
Thank you. I just really wanted that clarified. Appreciate that. I would just like to say that I was a village trustee in Lindenhurst for 21 years, and during that time, we had many proposals come before us, both residential and commercial, and to the best of my knowledge, I have never, I don't remember at all, any proposal with so many conditions, limitations, restrictions applied to it. So I think that, as far as I'm concerned, the county has certainly done their homework, and so have the two villages. I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Dennis, do you have anything?
My understanding with regard to the condition pattern book addresses the concerns about the may and the shall. And can you elaborate on that, Eric?
That's correct. I can actually read the specific condition that staff has proposed in Exhibit B. The conditional use for the planning and development of the Dimucci property shall be subject to the developer's strict compliance with the standards identified in the Dimucci Development Pattern Book. Where the language of the pattern book identifies standards that should be utilized or encouraged, the planning director shall analyze and make a recommendation that the architectural, sign, site layout, parking, and landscaping conditions of the pattern book are sufficiently met. The Planning, Building, and Zoning Committee shall review and approve all recommendations to determine compliance during a public informational meeting. What this means is that even though there are these discretionary terms in the pattern book, as pointed out repeatedly in the public testimony, staff has the authority to determine whether the intent of the pattern book and the condition in particular has been met. And that review and decision is further subject to the review and decision of the county board's committee. And so to address the question about whether there's any control, there is absolutely control.
John?
I have a question of Betsy Duker. Thank you. Relative to the concern about cut-throughs on various small roads contiguous to this property, I seem to remember years ago when I was involved with Lake Barrington that the village or the township is allowed to post a road for residents only. Could this be an application that could be applied to the two or three neighboring roads?
The local road jurisdiction could certainly do that if they chose.
That would be petitioned by that particular area, and it could be happening.
Well, the surrounding road network is township and village, and so whatever their local ordinance would allow, they could post it for that, their local ordinance.
So that is a possibility then?
Yes.
And I'd also point out that Betsy, in her testimony, had indicated, or some summary of the DOT conditions, had pointed out that the Lake County Division of Transportation will work with the local road authorities to minimize cut-throughs to any of these neighboring subdivisions.
And then that could be enforced by the Lake County Sheriff's Department.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Got it, John?
Thank you.
Jerry?
Any questions at this time?
Al?
May I have comments to it this time, or any conditions, or just questions?
Questions?
Okay, questions on, Eric, I have a question for you. The Dimucci's have asked for a 5-year time period between the preliminary plat and the final plat.
Right.
And the UDO is 2-year. Now, is that part of the conditions?
The Dimucci petitioner will request to the Planning, Building, and Zoning Committee of the County Board a variation from the time limit provisions to allow for the preliminary development plan stage to be in effect for 5 full years. The point being that for a project of this complexity, it takes a long time to get through the process of both attracting the developer, working with the developer to ensure that all of the uses fit within the site and all of the conditions are met, and all of that preparatory work that has to go into preparing a final development plan. It can't be done in a very short period of time. It takes years to get through that process.
Excuse me, that is not an issue with this board, then? So
That's
you're
not
saying-
an issue with the
Okay.
zoning board of appeals. That is a decision that needs to be made by the planning, building, and zoning.
Okay, thank
Or
you.
the
Thank you, Al. Mark?
The question that I had, Mr. Barthwaite gave me an answer a couple, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 meetings ago. I can't remember. But in the IGA, it is stated in the last major sentence that this consent order will be entered into the circuit court of the county of Lake. And it'll be good for 99 years. In this consent order, does that include the conditions that we received that are in Appendix B? Maybe the attorney would like to answer that, or maybe our staff could answer that.
They would be your partner. Correct.
Based on prior precedent of the IGA that is currently in effect between Hawthorne Woods and North Barrington, we went to the court because we had pending litigation. Here, we have pending litigation, namely 2 annexations. One, the proposed annexation to North Barrington, another one proposed annexation to Hawthorne Woods. Either one of those could be the vehicle for going to court. Then when you get in court, specifically answering the question posed, when you get in court, we would expect and ask and expect that the court order would specifically embrace, approve, and provide as a matter of judicial record the conditions of the new intergovernmental agreement, which will have included the matters that are in the letter of intent. And I might just, while I have this opportunity, I want to thank Mr. Dimucci for expressing his acceptance of the letter of intent. Does that answer the question?
Is Appendix A included in that court order?
Is what, sir?
The Appendix A, which are the conditions that we have just heard, will that be included in the court order?
Very definitely, so it should be, and we would expect would be included.
You're referring to Exhibit to Appendix B.
Or B, I'm sorry, wrong letter. In relationship to that same question, if there is deviation from Appendix B, would that have to go to court to be accepted, or does somebody have any jurisdiction to accept changes that are not specifically specified in the Appendix B?
The court order will need to include some provision for what I would call an escape valve for changing conditions. It will be subject to judicial review as well as review of the two municipalities and the county, as well as the developer.
And those are not easy to untangle.
Right, thank you very much. That's all I have right now.
Thank you. On page 10 of Exhibit B, under paragraph D, states we recommend that a de-icing program be adopted. I'm not going to read the whole paragraph. Why is it required? Recommend. There was some public concern about the de-icing and the salt runoff.
Staff recommended that it be adapted. In our condition, we didn't ask that it be a requirement, but the zoning board of appeals could make that a requirement if you so choose. The program is voluntary for the county and has been used very widely by consultants and by developers throughout the county as a means of promoting best management practices and progressive changes and the use of salt. And so it's a program that that would be expected to be used in this case as well, and there's no indication that it wouldn't be. But if the zoning board of appeals would like to tighten up that language to make it a requirement condition, you can do so.
I'd like to tighten it up. I don't, the rest of the board have any feeling on it?
By all means.
So you'll change that to require?
Do that.
On page 16 of Exhibit B, I think I'm feeling safe about it, but states under sanitary sewer and water infrastructure, public water, if public water supply is not available or cannot be provided to the subject property, an on-site water system may be used for the development under the following conditions. And I don't want to read all those conditions. I'm assuming that the letter of intent where the two villages and the county have agreed to allow Lake Zurich to supply water, that there will never be any need for an on-site water.
That is correct. It renders that condition moot by virtue of the Hawthorne Woods consent to immediately work to amend any agreements with Lake Zurich as it relates to making public water available immediately upon the approval of the final development plan. So yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have. Does any of the board have any other? Carol?
I have a question, or a concern actually. I'd like some kind of a description of what type of berming would take place on Old McHenry Road. That's my main concern with those individual homes and leading into a subdivision there.
The berming locations are obviously not determined at this phase. What we have in place in the pattern book is an opacity provision. Opacity is a provision that the zoning board is familiar with from the Unified Development Ordinance. It deals with the amount of obscurity, the level to which a site is obscured by obstructions, in this case vegetation, berming, and so forth. And it's my understanding that the pattern book calls for up to 50% opacity along Old McHenry Road. That would be facilitated by the inclusion of berming, landscaping, and so forth. The Unified Development Ordinance, for example, provides for, in landscape transition yards, per the ordinance, a 5-foot berm with landscaping, and that could be depending on the location of the improvements along or within the site, berming could be clustered in such a way to minimize visibility of those features along Old McHenry Road and beyond.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
Just, if I may, George.
John?
Thank you. Along that same line, Eric, kind of walk me through it. Assuming everything goes as planned and construction is about to begin, at what stage would there be maybe roads first and then berming, and how would, or do you have any ideas to what the progression would be?
I have my planning expert at hearing.
Well, our normal process is that we have a pre-application meeting with the applicant, and in this situation, we will have a quite extensive time period whereby the applicant will have to submit the proper documents to us and studies. That staff will take some time to look at that information, then we will convene a meeting with the developer and their consultants to go over our comments. They will need to make adjustments at that time based on our comments and our assessment of the conditions that are being imposed as part of this PUD. If they are missing some things, then we just simply will not accept the application until they generally are meeting the requirements of these conditions. And we will go through a fairly lengthy review cycle at different levels, and there will be several meetings with the developer until such time that we are ready to approve the final development plan.
Why don't you address the sequencing of improvements as well?
The sequencing that what I'm envisioning is what I'm trying to get to is, after the staff review, the developer will have to post a bond. There will be a site development permit issued to allow grading, but before that permit can be issued, they will have to get approval from the transportation agencies for access, and all the transportation improvements will have to be bonded and insured. And then we will issue a site development permit to allow them to start doing grading of the site. And at that time, based on the grading plan, the landscape plans, then we will oversee that work. All the soil erosion control measures will be implemented. We oversee that, and then the underground utility work and so on will all be done at that time. And then staff will. There will be performance guarantees posted for all the improvements, and then the reduction will be allowed at intervals based on certain performance measures being met. And then when everything is completed, then we will go into a maintenance period that will extend for quite some time based on the amount of landscaping that's on the site and the physical improvements that have to be in place for this development. We're envisioning probably between 5 and 7 years for performance and maintenance to be complete.
I think you answered another question I had relative to the funding on this thing and the amount of money. And I guess the key is bonding and performance guarantees. Just as a side note, a number of years ago, probably 25 or 30, there was a development that happened in Lake Zurich. He got half the roads in after he skimmed all this topsoil off, ran out of money, and the poor thing laid there for a number of years before anybody could complete it. I would hate to see anything like that happen on this project, and I know it won't because of the performance guarantees and the bondings that will be required.
And that's a standard in our ordinance today.
I understand it is.
Based on those past experiences with poor performance and completion of the improvements. And that's been in effect for years, and we've perfected that technique working with the developer.
Good, thank you.
I just want to mention the county does not hold the bonds for IDOT. The state highway is controlled fully by them.
Thank you. Mark?
Carol, you raised an interesting question as far as the berming along Old McHenry Road. And your answer that you gave, I'm a little confused on. You stated 5 feet for berming of soil, and then on top of that would be vegetation. Where I'm coming from in raising this question is the fact that I'm very familiar with Gurney Mills. I drive by it all the time. And there on Stone School Road, the berm that blocks the view from the residents of Hunt Club Farms, that berm has to be at least 20 feet high.
And it has 100% opacity.
Okay.
Nothing, you can't see through it at all.
You can't see anything inside there.
And what the pattern book provides for is 50% opacity. So there's a difference there in terms of the half of the site needs to be obscured by way of berming and landscaping. And bear in mind that the setbacks within the development site further provide for buffering by distancing the development itself from the property.